Number 7. Crossing the creek in Yellowstone. On June 4th, 2017, Mike Peterson kissed his girlfriend goodbye and walked away into the wilderness of West Yellowstone. Mike was 42 years old and had 4 grown children. He was also a frequent hiker who traveled through the Yellowstone National Park area and the Montana Rockies. He would often go hiking with friends or one of his kids. But on June 4th, he wanted to go by himself for a relaxing hike. He wore a bright orange vest so nobody would accidentally shoot him. Mike put on his gumboots and went off carrying a rifle. Throughout the day, he continuously texted his girlfriend, Bonnie Senger. The plan was to pick him up around 6 p.m. at the trailhead and get a late dinner. But when Bonnie arrived, Mike wasn't there. She waited around until almost 7:30 before it became clear he wasn't coming. By 10 o'clock that night, the search and rescue team was looking for Mike. Rescue team members discovered Mike's vest. They found his bear spray canister. They also discovered his gun and backpack, but they couldn't find Mike himself. After 3 days of searching, he was discovered floating in Beaver Creek. Gallatin County Sheriff Captain Jason Jarrett said Mike was trying to cross the creek when something went horribly wrong. Mike had crossed the creek earlier in the morning on his walk, but the spring snowmelt caused the creek to rise during the day. There was a lot more water than he expected, and Mike drowned. Number 6. Travel blogger peril in Yosemite. In October 2018, a young couple plunged to their deaths in Yosemite National Park. They were travel bloggers with an insatiable thirst for adventure. According to a family member, the pair died while trying to take a selfie. Vishnu Viswanath and Meenakshi Murthy attempted to take a picture together at Taft Point when they both lost their footing. Taft Point is an overlook that extends roughly 3,000 feet over the Yosemite Valley. It's a beautiful viewpoint to stop and enjoy the wild panorama, but it doesn't have any rails or fencing, making getting too close a gamble with death. Vishnu's brother told reporters that the couple had set up a tripod at the ledge, then backed up to the edge of the cliff to take the photograph. That was when they fell off. Shortly after, a tourist came across the tripod and camera. Putting 2 and 2 together, the tourist alerted park officials. The park officials discovered the couple's bodies at the bottom of the valley. Number 5. The Yosemite Killer. Between February and July of 1999, Yosemite National Park was a place of terror. The picturesque natural landscape became a dumping ground for mutilated bodies. In March 1999, police came across the corpses of 3 women who had been killed. Then in July, they found a 4th, headless corpse. The gruesome remains ultimately led authorities to a man who became known as the Yosemite Park Killer. Over 30 years earlier, in 1972, Stephen Stainer was kidnapped from his hometown of Merced, California. The young boy was held captive and abused for 7 years. He miraculously escaped, but his life was in shambles. The child had endured torture beyond human imagination and was traumatized. Despite this terrible ordeal, Stephen's brother Carrie turned into a monster himself. Perhaps he was motivated by the horrific thing that happened to his younger brother, or maybe he was just born bad. Whatever the case, 27 years later, Carrie Stainer became the Yosemite Park Killer. Stephen Stainer survived the impossible only to die in a motorcycle accident in 1989. A few years later, Carrie found a job as a handyman at a motel outside the entrance to Yosemite National Park called Cedar Lodge. It was while working in isolation that Carrie began to plot his evil schemes. Carol Sund, her teenage daughter Julie, and her daughter's friend Silvina Peloso checked into the Cedar Lodge in mid-February 1999. During their stay, all 3 went missing. It turned out Carrie had told them they had a leak in their room, which he needed to fix. Once inside the room, he strangled Carol and her daughter's friend Silvina. Then he loaded their bodies into the trunk of their car and forced 15-year-old Julie into the passenger seat. They drove around for hours while he looked for an appropriate place to dump the bodies. Once he found his spot, he killed Julie too. Carrie burned the car and left the bodies in the woods. When the police found the burnt vehicle on March 19th, the only way they could identify the women were by their dental records. The cops found the 2 bodies in the car's trunk but missed Julie's body. Then Carrie sent the police a letter detailing where they could find Julie while taunting the detectives. On March 25th, investigators found Julie Sund. During this time, they also questioned Carey, but they didn't think he had anything to do with it. He had no serious criminal record, and the cops let him go without a second thought. On July 22, 1999, Joy Armstrong's decapitated body was found near the cabin where she'd been staying in Yosemite. The day before, Carey had noticed her walking around and chose her as his next victim. He broke into her cabin at gunpoint and forced Joy into his vehicle. She managed to escape through the window, but Carey tracked her down and finished her off. There wasn't much evidence left behind at the first crime scene, but the second one was a totally different story. Carey left behind tons of evidence, including tire tracks from his truck. He left his hat at the scene. He must have realized he had messed up because by the time police figured out he was the man responsible, Carey had fled to a nudist camp in California. When the police apprehended Carey, he made a full confession. He told investigators that he hadn't initially intended to murder Joy Armstrong, but by that time he admitted the urge to kill had become too strong to resist. The Yosemite Park killer was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. He is still on death row at San Quentin State Prison to this day, but because of the court ruling on capital punishment, he won't be put to death by the state. Instead, he'll be locked up for life. Number 4. Swept away at Zion. In August 2022, a woman from Arizona was swept away during a flash flood at Zion National Park in Utah. Jital Agniotri was only 29 years old when she went on a summer vacation to one of the country's most popular parks. The trip started out perfectly fine. She went hiking with a group of friends through a canyon called the Narrows, but flash flood water suddenly entered the canyon due to monsoon rains. The group was swept away in the current. Everyone managed to grab hold of something and pull themselves out, except for Jital. She was carried downstream and wasn't discovered for 4 days. When rescue operators found her remains, she was 6 miles from where her friends had last seen her. Hiking through Zion National Park during the monsoon season can be extremely dangerous. Jital was not the only person who recently drowned in a flash flood. In September 2015, 7 people drowned during a storm in the park. The issue is that when the Virginia River breaks, huge amounts of water get pushed through the canyons and valleys. Floods can cause walls of water to form as tall as buildings. These sudden water walls can push away vehicles and roll stone boulders. During the storm in 2015, 12 people died in a town near the park because of the flood. Have you ever experienced a flash flood? Let me know in the comments. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 3. Thelma and the Smoky Mountain. The Deep Creek Trail inside the Great Smoky Mountain National Park is a favorite for visitors to Appalachia. For Thelma Pauline Melton, it was one of her favorite places in the world. For 20 years, she had been visiting Deep Creek in North Carolina. But in September 1981, the 58-year-old woman went into Deep Creek for the last time. Thelma was joined by her husband Bob and 2 of their friends for the camping trip. When they arrived at the campsite, Bob parked the trailer. Bob was about 20 years older than Thelma, so he wasn't healthy enough to take the hike with his wife. Thelma and her 2 friends got ready while Bob hung around in the trailer. The trail they were taking was a fairly easy one, so it should have been a simple operation. The trio began down the trail, and that was when things got weird. Thelma suddenly started to walk faster than her 2 friends. She didn't say anything. She didn't tell them what she was doing. She just started walking briskly ahead as her friends looked after her, baffled. She went around a corner and suddenly she was gone. Her friends assumed that maybe Thelma needed to use the bathroom behind a tree. But when she never appeared again on the trail, they thought maybe she had hurried back to the trailer. Thelma's friends arrived back at the campsite at 4:30, only to find Thelma not there. Bob hadn't seen her either, and he'd been at the trailer the whole time. Somewhere along the trail, Thelma had disappeared into thin air. By 6 o'clock that night, Thelma was officially missing. Over 150 people looked for her throughout that week. Search dogs came in, the rescuers pulled out all the stops, but they couldn't find a single trace of the missing woman. Nobody understood what happened, especially because of her suddenly walking forward so quickly away from her friends. It was like she purposely ran away into the wilderness to get lost. There were some other strange things that investigators learned during the search. The day before Thelma went missing, she used the phone at work for the first time in 4 years. She had never used the phone before, but made a bunch of phone calls right before her disappearance. The police tried to trace the calls, but didn't have any luck. Thelma could still be alive right now for all anybody knows, although she would be 100 years old. Her body was never found, and Thelma never surfaced again. Number 2. The Joshua Tree Love Triangle. Erin Hevelin grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. She was an animal lover with a deep love for horses. Erin met her future husband in the 5th grade, John Corwin. They began dating when Erin turned 16 and were married in November 2012. It was a classic romance story that ended in a twisted love triangle of blood and death. Things turned sour when the couple moved to John's Marine Base in 29 Palms, California. This was in 2013. Downstairs from Erin and John Corwin were 2 other couples. There was Connor and Aisling Malaki with their son Brian. There was also Chris and Nicole Lee with their daughter Liberty. When the men were on duty at the base, the wives would hang out in one of their apartments, eating snacks and gossiping. When the men were home, the 3 couples would hang out and barbecue. They would watch movies together and binge TV shows. It was a really great arrangement since they were all couples and all 6 people got along very well. Unfortunately, Erin and Chris began getting along a little too well. Chris Lee was obsessed with weapons. He had been reprimanded by a commanding officer for using rocket launchers like he was playing with toys. At the base, Chris slowly gained a reputation for being reckless. Erin was completely drawn to Chris's bad boy attitude and penchant for the dangerous. Even though Erin and John had known each other since the 5th grade and dated since they were teens, they weren't very good at being married. The challenges that came with being newlyweds put a strain on their relationship. Money in particular was a big problem. They accused one another of overspending and got into dramatic fights about cash. When Erin got pregnant, she was ecstatic, but a few weeks later, she miscarried. This added to the stress already fracturing the new marriage between her and John. At this point, Erin was emotionally fragile. Chris observed that and used it to his advantage. He and Erin started spending time together without their spouses around. On a Sunday night in February 2014, the Corwins and the Lees got together to watch a new episode of one of their favorite TV shows. But Chris didn't want to watch, and Erin said she wasn't into TV violence that night. She went to her room, and Chris went with her to play video games. Alone, they started kissing, and that was the start of an intense affair. Chris and Erin started talking about leaving their spouses and running away together. They weren't able to keep much a secret, considering they were living next door. Nicole found out about her husband sleeping with Erin and things blew up, but the affair didn't stop. Soon, Erin was pregnant again. On June 28, 2014, Chris planned a trip to Joshua National Park. He had planned the trip with his friend Connor, but Connor canceled at the last minute, and by a rather strange coincidence, Erin happened to be driving to Joshua Tree to look for places where she could bring her mom during an upcoming visit. Most people might look online for cool places, but Erin says she wanted to see them for herself. It just so happened to be at the exact same time that Chris was going on a trip alone. Erin left at 7:30 in the morning and was never seen alive again. After she was reported missing, the police figured out who was responsible very quickly. Chris Lee lied to the police about the affair. Officers discovered a garrote in his car, an instrument used by assassins to strangle people. When they looked at his internet history, they found Chris had been searching how to dispose of a body. It was obvious that Chris had taken Erin to Joshua Tree National Park under the guise that they would run away together. Instead, he killed her. The issue for the police was that they couldn't find Erin's body. They searched over 1,200 square miles of the park and found nothing. Then, after the search was called off on August 16th, a caver smelled something nasty coming out of an abandoned mine. It was Erin Corwin. She had been strangled and dumped 200 feet into a mine shaft. Chris had also thrown a propane tank into the shaft as part of an attempt to explode and hide the evidence. Erin had gone to Joshua Tree National Park thinking that Chris was going to propose marriage. Chris had told her that a special surprise awaited her in the park. Instead of a marriage proposal, it took Chris an estimated 5 long minutes to choke Erin until she stopped breathing. At his trial, Chris Lee was given life in prison. Number 1. Burning ashes in Arches National Park. A man from Texas traveled to Utah's Arches National Park as part of a trip to spread his father's ashes. Unfortunately, he died trying. James Hendricks was 66 years old when he went to the park. He was on an emotional adventure across the American West to the Sierra Nevada. James was planning to spread his father's ashes at the end, but he would make stops along the way. One of the places he wanted to stop was Arches National Park for a small hike in the heat. According to park officials, James was reported missing on August 1, 2023. When rangers went to look for James, they discovered him off the side of a nearby trail, dead from heat exhaustion. It's believed that James became disoriented and wandered off the path, completely lost and out of it. He was suffering from a deadly mixture of dehydration, altitude sickness, and heat. The park rangers found a single water bottle near his body, empty. Most experts say that if you're going to be hiking in extreme heat, you should drink at least a gallon of water per hour. James only had a single water bottle. On the day that James went missing, the temperature reached a balmy 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat wasn't too extreme, but mixed with the altitude, it still proved deadly. Would you risk going for a hike in the scorching sun, even if it was part of a journey to spread someone's ashes? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!